It is February the 7th, 2026. I'm Chris, and this is the future of photography.
The future of photography.
And we're all back together. Adrian, Jeremiah, good morning, evening.
Hello.
Hi. Good morning.
Hi there. So, without further ado, let's just dive in. Jeremiah, you sent us a topic about aesthetics, and I found a quote somewhere. I have no idea who said it, but it says, "Every time has its aesthetic or its look, and every classic look was once a technical limitation that people learned to love or hate."
I love that quote.
Discuss.
I love that quote because that is precisely at the target of what I thought we should discuss today.
Awesome.
We've been discussing some technical stuff in the past, some cameras and all. Let's talk about aesthetics, the aesthetic of a photograph and what it means to kind of draw from different eras, both from within the era, what does it look like? And as we look back, and why plugins, filters, apps serve to enable us to recreate that aesthetic. Why is one of the questions that we'll visit. And once we know why, then we can discuss how it affects the those that are looking at it, both from those who have lived through that era or those who have not, because that also will be a little bit different. And how it also kind of plays into photographers that are very adept and interested in using old practices, whether they be salt prints or solar or just traditional daguerreotypes, etc., and create those using the actual cameras and whatever medium they're printing on. But that I'm always enamored with how aesthetics on a print create a very different emotional response. And part of my thinking is that yes, there's a nostalgia, but it's bigger than that, I think. It's not quite the nostalgia. It's really about distance in time. When we hold a photograph that was, say, taken in the 30s, and we look at it on paper, very delicate, because we know that we look at that photograph or feel it as an object of history. We can assume that most of the people in the photograph are gone or dead. There is a sense of distance, and yet the subject or the people, the environment, seem to embrace us through time. So I think that the time in which the photograph was taken, our responses to that era, however subjective or objective that may be, create a very different condition than looking at something we snap, create, look at a screen now. It's a very different emotional response to the work. And I always wondered why that is, like how an aesthetic of the 70s, and that goes for cinema as well, to create that kind of gritty 70s, grainy, wide lens or zoom lens action movie that we were fans of when we were growing up. So it imprinted, those early aesthetics imprinted on us. And recreating them doesn't necessarily create the same conditions as when it was shot, because then you had the limitations of film speed. So it was grainy. Maybe you didn't want grain, but it was still grainy. Maybe you only had a zoom lens, so you would use that because of the budget. but that created an aesthetic that defined the time, and it also defined the emotional moments of that time, how they resonate with individuals. That'll be different for each. It's almost, when you listen to Bruno Mars, doing a song that really recreates the kind of funk of the 70s and does it in such a superb way. There is that kind of recapturing of the emotional moment of funk.
Yeah, but it's a different emotional moment, isn't it?
It is, because it's retro.
Because I mean, the aesthetic, or let's call it like a visual signature of something, it's always a product of its time, and it gets a cultural meaning in its time, and a lot of people who lived in that time will then look back at it, and that kind of triggers a response in them that is different from the response it triggers right now. And you're right, it's a product of constraints very often of the censor of film, or the aging of film, that maybe even over time gives it a look like pictures from the 70s that are now more magenta than anything, just because the colors
faded chrome slides.
Exactly. And it's really interesting because even those limitations change their meaning. Grain in film was noise, was bad, until it turned into mood, right, or emotion, or dynamic range limits of film turned into where a flaw, but then they turned into this hard contrasty look, right? That is a kind of like a stamp on it of the time, and yeah, it's a really interesting exploration to look at whose emotions get influenced by that, in which way, and where does that come from? Because everyone has their own filter that they built up over their lifetime. So yeah.
Here's a question: like, when a photographer like Fox Talbot looked at a landscape, he saw the landscape as we see it. I mean, full color, sharp. There it was.
Wasn't the world black and white back then? Calvin and Hobbes established that.
Evidently. But he took his big camera and placed it down. But I'm sure that the beauty he first experienced in making that decision to go through all of the Sturm und Drang of taking that picture was because he was inspired by that moment in the landscape, the light, etc. And yet he worked to the limitations. He captured it as best he could, using that kind of what we now see as a sepia version, a salt print, etc. But now we look at it and we go, oh, that is beautiful. Beyond the subject, the actual interpretation of it, with the significant limitations of the technology, create another response to the actual picture that in a way transcends the actual picture.
It's interesting also because in the past, I feel that the limitations were just technical limitations, and you had to work with what you had. And I feel like we are now in a time when there are no limitations anymore. We're looking, we talked about those 20 stop sensors in smartphones coming up. There's so much more. And now it feels like, especially with the advent of AI, that we can pretty much create anything we like without any limitations, even things that are not technically possible, but we can emulate them. So have we now switched over to a different kind of thing here?
No, I actually think that looking back at this period of image making, this particular period, and I'm just imagining that looking back on this, we will look at this kind of, you can call it slop or overproduced or just slick, a plasticky vibe. I mean, there's something missing here, but it's the uncanny valley again when we look at some. We're getting beyond that. Soon it will be indistinguishable.
You know what historians will look at this period of photography the same way we look back at the clothes and style of the 80s, right? Which was
I don't
wild,
know.
Embarrassing as it was,
and wouldn't probably will never come back. Hopefully,
I don't know because I think there's a lot. Jeremiah, you got quite close to it for me when you just you talked about it being pristine and perfect. For me, the thing that's missing in some of the, let's say the so good technology and the imagery that it produces is texture, right? So what did Fox Talbot see? Well, he saw the world like we saw it, but the real world has texture, right? And some of the what I find is lacking from the imagery of today or the image making machines of today is that texture. They don't bring any character necessarily to them. It's why people like old cinema lenses, right? Because they have character, or Soviet block stills photography lenses, or some stuff like that, because they bring something extra. They contribute.
I think you've hit something really important here, which is the handprint of those who have captured the photographer, the artist, the cinematographer, whatever. That handprint. I mean, there is, in the Middle East, if you go, to Turkey or anywhere in the East, buying a kind of a traditional rug, you'll find even the most beautiful rugs, perfectly done, antique, gorgeous, will always have a flaw in them. And it's because the aesthetic is that only Allah is perfect. And so they will put in a deliberate flaw to pay honor to those that are beyond the kind of slickness. Now, we're trying to do this technically in reverse. I know I do personally with my own work, and there's a huge difference between, say, the conditions of my photography, which I try to do influenced by those who've come before me, but I want a very aesthetic, beautiful look. And then I will work with AI on different kind of image making that appear to be photographs, but are created that are, they look like they've been taken with very old cameras under very old conditions, and they provoke a very different response. And so using the limitations and advantages of our technology to present the subject is something that I've always been interested in. Why do I respond to a technique that was, say, evolved in, 1700s and, etching, or lithography in the 1900s, or, early photographic processes? I'm captivated by my response because it feels beyond the actual subject. I take in the subject, but I also feel the connection with time. And maybe that sort of transcendence of timelines and connection is something inherent.
But you're also professionally involved in making media, and I question if Talbot really saw the limitations of the medium, because I feel like people usually don't see the limitations.
I don't think he did.
The first people who saw that train coming at them in the cinema were shocked. They were running out of the cinema because it felt dangerous. When in the 70s, that looked like the real life, because that's the medium you had. I remember in the 90s playing Doom on a computer for the first time. Oh man, that was lifelike, right?
Yeah, that was amazing.
It was amazing, and it was like, or
Castle
any of
Wolfenstein.
any of the computer games in the years following, from today's perspective, look like a bunch of blobs and angled polygons, right? So, but back then it felt so much more real than today. So I'm pretty sure that with the things we can do today, that yes, future historians will look back and we'll laugh at what we made with AI.
Can we qualify real a little? Because I have to say, when I played Doom in the 90s, it didn't feel real as such, but it did feel state of the art, right?
It felt so much better than it feels today. And that's just a couple of decades ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go back and you play, because the thing with the games, right, is you can play them, you can go back and play them, and in emulators, sometimes sure. Now hardware that you can buy hardware that plays these games now. But it always fit. I mean, the obvious things being the audio and the graphics. They have clearly aged immensely, and that's that's fine. They are of their period, right? So
I know some artists who are working in block pixelation as painting or digital creations, but they are creating work with as few pixels as they can. Not as many, not sharp, but so that the image reveals itself. The further back from the work you get, the more astounding it is, and the closer you get to it.
Impressionism, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. And digital impressionism.
Yeah, and I remember like getting my first digital camera. I think it was 356K by 200 some odd K. I'm thinking, like, compared to the Kodachrome slides that I was like in love with. Whoops, sorry, my daughter. That was just like, oh my God, I can't see anything. It's all pixels. Now we need pixels, right? We need pixels for an aesthetic choice, not for any kind of limitation. We celebrate that aspect of it.
I read from a scientist who used to use the metaphor of pixels on a screen to teach kids about the Planck constant and things like that. And he says you can't do that anymore because they have no idea what pixels are. So,
really?
Okay, well, that didn't last long then, did it?
Yeah, that's just way too small. What the heck is a pixel?
Yeah.
Anyway, where do we go from here? By the way,
let me talk a little bit, because I'm not going to reveal too much because my pick of the week is self-promoting this week. But we talked last week about me building an app, and one of the things I wanted to do was with building my own photo management app was investigate the aesthetic of the user interface, because user interfaces are very, very samey these days. It's difficult.
And there's a good reason for that.
Well, but yes, there is. But is there? Does it have to be that way? I mean, I remember going back to when I was, in terms of looking for what I might do with my own app, on the vibe coding side, I went back and looked at Winamp. Do you remember Winamp, the MP3 player?
Kicks the llama's ass, yes.
In the 90s, yeah. Right, so you can go back, and there's actually a web page that is just a whole set of Winamp skins, right? And the what people used to play with, and people used to make their own user interfaces and things like that, which I think it's just awesome, right? I think it's just a great thing, and I think so. Yeah, but it does give you an aesthetic, right? We've all lived with very sophisticated operating systems now for 20 plus years, but when Mac OS 9 became Mac OS 10 and got a whole new look. That was a big thing. When Windows 3.1 became Windows 95, that was a whole big thing. And they were new and exciting, right? Those aesthetics at the time. But now they're old and exciting, or is it just old and interesting? I don't know.
It's funny that it's funny. I saw there's a new Vision Pro app that's about to come out, which is basically it puts you in a old being, I guess, 90s video game basement with every video game from Pong to Space Invaders, et cetera, and you're playing this with your helmet on. But all the machines, even if you go in back of them, they're all like the scuff marks are there, the plywood is there. Your controller, when you press it, you can see the buttons on the machine going. It's perfectly recreated versions of those old games. Now, that in and of itself is technically pretty dazzling, I really have to say. Just amazing, because you can walk around and play different machines, and you're instead of a button to get in, there's a coin
Of course
that
it
you
is.
grab. But what's interesting is there is, with all of the amazing games that are available to us, and I'm assuming that anybody who has a Vision Pro, an Apple Vision Pro, has a PlayStation or similar, and can experience the most sophisticated, dazzling games, would choose to play old-fashioned games that basically are like Pong Plus. It's not about the gameplay. It's about the aesthetic, the memory of it being there, how you felt.
Gameplay in part. I think it is because some of these things are just more fun, right? And partly it's a combination of the aesthetic and the style that was popular at the time. But this, if you think about art, right? Yeah, that resonates for me in terms of in terms of art. I mean, why do we revere the Impressionists? Why is the Renaissance art so special? What is it that's about it? I mean, it's all very much of its time, albeit the trends didn't perhaps move quite so quickly as they do today, because in part because of lack of global communications. But the Mona Lisa is an aesthetic. You wouldn't paint a picture like that today, I don't think. But that doesn't
just get AI to paint it.
It doesn't stop us thinking it's amazing, though, does it? Right? It doesn't. It does.
But I'm gonna agree with you on this, because there is a difference between the appreciation of the historical realm of art and aesthetics and one's experience with it as one grows up. In other words, they say that the music you're first exposed to and really kind of connected with sort of defines it for the rest of your life, so that when you hear whatever that music is, it brings back the joy of one's youth or all the expectations, etc. That aesthetic. And I'll say that with photography, that the photography that one first experienced imprints. And so in recreating that aesthetic, you are trying to get back to it. Now, when you go beyond that to earlier than your own aesthetic, that becomes something a little bit different in terms of how you're responding. And then even beyond that, when you go earlier to, Niepce, Daguerre, all of those imagery, and back to painting, etc., as you were talking about, that is, I would say, more of an intellectual appreciation. Like, I look at Mona Lisa, I appreciate it. I look at Van Eyck, I appreciate it. But it's funny, but if I look at, say, Don McKellen shot of the Vietnam War, etc., I have a much different response. I'm not even talking about the image now. I'm talking about the rawness of it. Early Magnum or Diane Arbus, the formalism, or Irving Penn, again, Avedon. Those, because of where I was on my photographic journey, speak to me in different ways, trying to recreate that now or experiencing that through other artists. It just has a very different vibe. And that's one of the things I wanted to discuss is the whole nature of time, the imprinted aesthetic, the historical aesthetic. How does that provoke different emotional responses to imagery?
I think for me, there's an element of how did they do that then, right? Like, how did they build Stonehenge, right? Yeah, that's quite a question, right? Because if you go there, it's quite impressive, and the stones are quite big, right? Or the Great Pyramids, right? How were they built? So there's an element of how did they do it with the tools at the time? But for me, especially when it comes to, let's narrow it down a little bit for now, but for painting, right? I probably respond more emotionally to painting than I do, for example, to sculpture. But for me, when I see an old painting, it's not just how did they do that then, because actually, for them, they were using tools that were well established, right? Be it a paintbrush and some paint or whatever it might be. It's the art and the craft of it that I find amazing, and I think that there's an aesthetic, I think, when it comes to that. I mean, the difference between a chiaroscuro and an impressionist painting, right? They're very different aesthetically, but I can appreciate them both, and the art and the craft and that's gone into it. With photography, it's really interesting, right? For me, I respond in a different way, I think, to an aesthetic around photography. I think because, and by the way, I don't think I'm not going down the path of photography isn't art, it's just cheating, right? That's not where I'm going with this. But it is a very different way of things. So if you have a strong concept for a photograph, actually the art and the craft of that is in building the concept. Are you building a set for it? Are you dealing with costumes? Are you or whatever it might be? The act of pressing the button has some technique about it, but if you're doing conceptual photography, everything that you do to build the image actually happens outside of the moment of taking the photograph. Now, there are lots of other types of photography, of course. Not all of it is conceptual and studio based. You could talk about Cartier-Bresson and capturing the moment, and all of and war photography and all sorts of things. But it speaks to me in a different way, I think. Not entirely sure where I'm heading with this, to be honest, lads. So help me out anytime you like. But there's definite. For me, there's definite reactions based on things that happen at different times or different media as well. I think, different media makes a difference to me.
Well, why don't we ask Chris? I want to ask Chris, why is he building a DRM 70s aesthetic?
No, Adrian is doing that. So I'm but I'm on the same boat. I do not have definite answers here, and I think Jeremiah has given us a likely impossible task to really answer this in like a 45 minute episode. So
or years for that matter.
It's or a lifetime. This is something that I think everyone will have a different answer to, and everyone will look at from a different angle, because everyone responds to things in a different way, and that has to do with your history, with your upbringing, with your early exposures to things, with your lifetime exposures to things, with your there's so much that goes into what shapes you and how you see your world, what type of in Germany we say what kind of glasses you have on that you look through.
And yet the kind of amount of photographic applications and software to recreate the old limited aesthetics speaks to something, speaks to a yearning.
Mm.
And why do we have that yearning? What is it about that aesthetic? That's really what I'm asking more broadly, that makes us feel connected to those images. And I'm, I think I was talking about this new Polaroid camera that I got that just has a bunch of interesting filters and it prints from the camera. And, I haven't received this, but you can go 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like has a button. And I haven't, like I said, still on back order, haven't gotten it yet, to think it's coming from Japan. But the idea of being able to somehow teleport visually and make that connection over time is, I think, a yearning for immortality, is it not?
Possible? Absolutely possible.
I don't know.
Are we yearning for immortality? That's an interesting one.
Instinctively, I'm not talking about consciously. I'm saying, why are we drawn to older aesthetics as well as newer aesthetics? There's a difference. And in terms of the future of photography, how will we look back? What is a new aesthetic that has not yet been seen?
I'm looking forward to this. I wanted to talk to you guys about this actually, so that I'll dive in here, right? Because I think we've just reached a point recently where individual artists can build their own digital tools and not be constrained, particularly, by, having to do years of technical learning. So an idea that's been going through my head just today really was that, I started off my exploration of vibe coding and using AIs to build stuff on the basis of something that does it fixes a productivity issue for me, a workflow issue for me. It helps me manage my images. But then I thought, well, actually, what if I built an app that allows me to manipulate those images in a way that in a way that's different from others. So maybe not based around sliders, but based around something else. Or maybe it's a workflow it supports, or maybe, you can play with, I don't know, blend modes or something like that in a way that perhaps the big mainstream tools don't support. I wonder what happens when artists can build the digital tools that they need, as well as, in real world situations to build their images, because you don't have to use anymore. This is very recent, but I don't think you're not constrained anymore by using a tool that you've bought from somebody else, right? You can actually make your own tools now to hammer away at those pixels.
Yeah. Yes, you can build your own quote filter.
Then how about we take the detour? No, we take the exit here to our picks of the week, because I think, Adrian, you want to show us something. Let's start with you.
I have a pick of the week, yes, and it's not self-promoting because I don't gain anything by sharing it other than the joy of sharing it. But I have been building this application, my pick of the week, and I have been exploring the aesthetic, right, of the application that I use. So I have I started building off in just a normal baseline, whatever the standard operating system looks like. It's a window. It's got a red, a yellow, and a green dot in the middle, at the top left, and stuff like that. Then I thought, I'm going to play with it. I want to change the colors. And so I put it in a dark mode and chose a sort of loomy green, color scheme and things like that. And I made it, gave it a sort of 80s 8-bit vibe, changed the fonts to monospaced fonts and things like that. And that was fun, right? And actually, I like it so much, I've made it the default view when the app opens, right? And I have to switch back to the so-called normal one. And now I'm experimenting, and now I'm going to go out on a limb because I've got a little demo for you guys, but I'm not sure if it's going to work because this bit of code is still a bit flaky. But Chris, if you've got it and you can share, and you can show,
I'm sharing it right now,
my shared screen. So
this is for those who listen, it says slide viewer, and then there's an interface of some sort.
Well, that's right. Yes. So this is my slide viewer. So you remember in the 1970s and in the 80s, yeah, we had handheld slide viewers, yeah, with a light and a magnifying glass, and you usually used to pop the slide in the slot in the top, and then you could just look at it, and it was like having something the size of a mobile phone today, perhaps.
We had
But
an
it was a way to
electrical
view.
one. It had a light source built in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it was. And the one that we had in our family, the light was off, and then when you popped the slide in, it was sprung, and that was the switch to turn the light on. And that was like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and it gave you a little handheld viewing screen. So I thought, well, why don't I just build one of these? And that's what you're seeing now. I've got a little thing. I can set a folder for it to browse through, and you can browse through the images. It's not coming quite so cleanly through on the screen. So this is actually a floating window. So the black borders that anybody's seeing right now are not there on my screen. It's literally just the non-rectangular shape of the app. That is so it's a window, but it's got transparent bits, so you only see the bits you want to see. It's got no window header or anything like that. It doesn't have those black borders that you're seeing on the screen here. But if I go to, but I can actually,
and we must emphasize, you're not a coder. You haven't written code for this.
I'm not a coder, and this is just a side quest on the main app that I'm building. But I can just go through my folder here, and I can display the photos from my folder, whatever they might be. I mean, you could set it to any folder you want, right? Of course, but this is just a folder on a drive, right? But you can see, that it's. I'm just using my arrow keys to step through the photos. It is flaky. The code is pretty flaky at the moment. It keeps crashing, so I will stop.
While you're ahead.
Before the demo crashes, right? So I'm in the middle of this one at the moment. The 1980s viewer works great, and the app itself is working great now. One of my steps in the not too distant future, I think, might be to just pop it up on GitHub and open source it just for fun. I'm having a whirl of a time. But imagine, right, if this was. If this viewer here that we have here, you see that the grey panel underneath the window doesn't have any controls. But what if it had control knobs that did things, right? And you could use it to, I don't know, like an old oscilloscope, right, where you had to tune in to the right frequency to get the wave to appear on the screen on an old oscilloscope, something like that. Do you know? So 70s aesthetic for photo viewing. Today.
It sounds like you're having a massive blast. It's good.
I am actually. Most all of this actually was coded using ChatGPT 5 codecs because I kept running out of Claude credits. Claude was delivering slightly better results, but it kept saying, no, you've run out of tokens and you can't refresh for 5 hours. And I'm like, well, I'll go.
Claude has just updated their model to the new version, so it's probably even better now.
ChatGPT, like 20 minutes after Claude.
They have,
Claude
okay.
4.6. Yeah, Opus 4.6 came out. I think as we recorded, it was either yesterday or the day before. And literally 15, 20 minutes later, Codex or ChatGPT 5.3 Codex came out.
All right.
Along with associated product upgrades
right
for
now.
the things, to allow us to use agents more and stuff like that. So this is, again, as we've said before, these tools are the worst they're going to get. So if one of the three of us hasn't coded their own photo editing tool, right, with novel and innovative ways of manipulating photos by the end of this year, I will be very surprised. I'm not going to set it as a deadline, but I'll be very surprised if one of the three of us doesn't go there.
I'm working on one, but before I begin, I am making such a detailed list of everything I need in it, like everything, so I don't have to go back, refresh, and the order in which I want to do it. So I'm trying not to just dive in, but do it in a very linear way.
That's cool because I use a very brief Markdown document that just has user stories in it. I'm up to about 40 odd at the moment, and it and you can just when you're doing the planning conversations with your coding agent, You just say, well, where should we go next? Like group them together into things that are sensible to code, right? I want to do this functionality next, go over there and stuff like that. So it's, it's good fun. Anyway, that's my pick of the week. I'm not having fun, and I'm sure you guys have picks of the week too. But yeah, are they as good and as fun as mine?
It's just awesome to see you having a lot of fun with the new superpower that you have acquired.
One thing that I would recommend for fun is if you had a battery case on it with little AAA batteries that you could actually open the slider, remove the battery, and it'll go to black.
All right. Jeremiah, you shared with us photographer Hans P. Krause Jr.
No, I think this is more of a gallery or a dealer, but this particular dealer
I see.
Has a enormous collection of, I guess, now dead photographers working
vintage
in a very
photography.
Similar, yeah, and I posted this just to give people an opportunity quickly to explore the different photographers who work, their aesthetics, and just examine one's own particular responses to the aesthetic of these things. They're all, amazing in their own. These are obviously things that have influenced my exploration of old techniques and how to create work that provokes this kind of response. But they are amazing in their historical context, but also in the what they were photographing and how they were doing it. So it's just a nice little mini trip down the history of photography at a certain era.
All right. Thank you. And I brought us something that's from a completely different planet. Remember about 10 years ago when Olympus came out with the in-body image stabilization going to like a massive 5.5 stops, and then they added the lens image stabilization going to an even more massive 6.5 stops of handheld photography that gives you like several seconds of hand holding a camera. And back then, there was the claim that it's impossible to get further because Earth's rotation is in the way. And I always wondered why that is. And now there's an article by, or out on Petapixel, that not only explains why that is, but they also look into what's currently possible. Here's a Hasselblad example of the sensor not moving while the camera vigorously shaking. And they have cracked that code or that nut by employing not just GPS data, so your camera knows exactly where it is on the planet, but also the compass data, which way it's pointing. And they now, just in a very specific combination of lens and camera, and only in the center of the lens, but they can do 10 stops of stabilization. Which means, if you do the math, if you could handhold a 50th of a second without any stabilization, you can then, with 10 stops of stabilization, handhold 20 seconds.
Wow.
So technology is making tripods obsolete. That's pretty much what they're saying. So the change in technology, the advancements do not only change the aesthetics, but they also change the possibilities, and that is that's an example of that.
That's a pretty good example.
That's a wild example. 10 stops, 20 seconds. Okay, now at the corner it's only 8 stops, so it's only in the center. But even 8 stops is wild. So yeah.
And they're using the DJI camera. Oh, sorry, the Hasselblad camera.
It's a Hasselblad, yeah, owned by DJI. But yeah, it's a tech miracle of sorts.
It is very impressive. I wonder what aesthetics will become possible, right? I mean, I think, yeah, because you can keep a camera steady today, right? You just do it on a tripod. But
I think using a longer lens.
Yeah. longer
If you can
telephoto
handhold for
shots.
3 seconds, if you can handhold for 3 seconds on a really long lens, now that would be very interesting. I'm not trying to poo-poo it. It's just part of what's going through my head is that's a really expensive and intricate and delicate solution to the problem of 3 sticks. Right, so you've gone from 3 sticks to tens of thousands of dollars worth of electronic hardware. It's like,
but that's the
soon
argument
it'll be everywhere.
that's the argument that everyone does when it comes to new technology. Why do we need a laptop? We have a computer in the corner. Why do we need an iPhone? We have a laptop. So
I know. Yeah, 640K is enough for everybody.
Yeah.
I get it. Right, I get it.
Anyway,
but
10 stops, handheld. I think it's crazy. And with that, visit us on the interwebs, thefuturephotography.com, or on our Discord, or wherever you find us. You can find us in your podcast player of choice and even on the video tubes. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, everyone, take care and bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Future of Photography. Join the discussion on our Discord, find the show notes and all episodes at thefutureofphotography.com, and subscribe wherever you listen to audio.